So I'm delighted to welcome Kathryn Jackson for the Winning Through Group interview. And Kathryn is somebody I've been determined to interview for a long, long time now. And we finally got to do it, which is fantastic. And I know Kathryn has well, not just a stories, many interesting and inspirational stories to tell. So I'll let her do that. And I'm sure it's going to be a real eye-opener for us all. So without ado, welcome, Kathryn. If you just introduce yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Absolutely, Steve. Thanks very much for inviting me along. I think it was probably about 6 or 7 months ago now, wasn't it, that we first started talking about having a conversation. And so thank you from the bottom of my heart for your patience in waiting. And hello to everybody that's listening. My name is Kathryn Jackson, and since about 1995, I have been fascinated in exploring and understanding people at work. So what is it about workplaces that causes us to either enjoy them and be really inspired and motivated by them, or to want to kind of secretly murder most of the people that we work with? And if we never go back there again, that's great. And so, you know, one of the opportunities that I had back in the early 2000s was I was working in the financial services sector over in the UK as an internal coach, working with some amazing people in one of the UK banks. And I had the very unfortunate experience of learning during a senior meeting that myself and my team were going to be made redundant. Had one of those really awkward moments in a meeting when the boss leader stands up and gets very excited about his new organizational structure, shares the plan, and you sit there and think, oh, hang on a minute, I'm not on there and neither's my team. And so it all got a little bit awkward when I asked that question, because I don't think he'd realised that either. The good news was that the reason that myself and my team were all being made redundant was because we'd actually done what we'd set out to achieve, which was to grow people management skills within a corporate IT department of this bank. And so we'd kind of done such a good job that all our people leaders were leading people really well, so they could just work in with HR. They didn't need us anymore. The bad news was that I then obviously had to make myself and my team redundant, and that was a really interesting and very uncomfortable experience for me. Until that point, I'd worked as a career coach with various people from the other side, so helping people to navigate through what they were going to do post redundancy. But now, of course, the shoe was on the other foot, and not only did I have to now tell other people that their job was no longer there, but I also had to work out what I was going to do. And there is nothing to say about redundancy other than it can be absolutely pants. The initial feeling, that initial feeling of loss of identity and where to from here. And at first it can be a bit exciting. We can, let's live our dreams. Oh my God, no, wait, that's really scary, because that's actually, quite a big thing to say. I was married to a Kiwi at the time, and we had some really deep chats about, we'd always wanted to come to New Zealand and give it a crack over here. And so we did decide that we were going to move to New Zealand. So this was back in 2006. I came here with bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, expecting to be able to set up as a coach, because I'd really enjoyed the coaching side of my work in the UK. And when I landed into New Zealand, one of the gorgeous things about this country is that it's almost like locked in time, about 30 years ago, but compared to the UK. But what that also does is it meant that when I went to talk to organizations about being a coach and about engagement, employee engagement, and understanding motivators and drivers, I was kind of met with all these blank looks from big businesses that you would expect otherwise. And they sort of said, well, we pay people, why should we do anything other than just pay them? And so I kind of rapidly realized at that stage that my big picture plans for a coaching practice probably weren't going to work out. And so I actually took some consulting roles, so some short-term contracts within the world of HR, just to see whether I could start to make a little difference in some organizations. At the time, or during all of that time, we experienced a few minor earthquakes in New Zealand. You know, one of the attractions actually of what we call the shaky isles is the fact that you can usually have a bit of a wobble while you're here on holiday. And so my husband said to me, you know, just so you know, that's about normal for New Zealand. We'll get lots of them. You'll hardly feel them. And by the time you've realised it's an earthquake, it'll be well and truly over. Well, we've since had several words because in 2010, September at 4:35 a.m. embedded in my brain, we had one of the biggest earthquakes the region's ever had. Now that was a game changer for us on a personal level, and also for me on a professional level. The September earthquake pretty much immediately took our home. We could tell that it was, we say munted. There's a word over here, Christchurch world, which is munted, which means your house is irreparable. And so, you know, we realized pretty quickly that it was not going to be a repair, it was going to be a rebuild. But because of the size of this event, and because New Zealand is the way it is, we have a very small population, we kind of were then in a very big queuing system to look at rebuilding. Not only that, but the village, the part, we call it the village, the part of Christchurch that we lived in was beautiful, close to the sea, close to lagoons, but what it was also suffering from was very unstable land. So for about a year and a half, we lived in a very broken home, sharing a portaloo with 8 other families outside our house. We were actually quite lucky that it was right outside our house. Some people had to walk, you know, about 3 blocks to reach the communal portaloos. And so, you know, this was a really interesting experience that I just personally had not got on my radar. It was not part of my life plan to live like this. And of course, because I'm human, I had some very dark moments during that time. But what I really want to focus on today is that that moment, 2010, 4:35 a.m., that changed everything. My life forked. And it could have forked into the darkest place imaginable. What it's actually done is it's catapulted my career. It's catapulted New Zealand into realizing that if we are going to have successful, strong workplaces, we need to understand well-being, and we need to deliberately design it into both workplaces and people. You know, I'm now really proud to be living in a country where the PM, the Prime Minister, just a few years ago has announced, you know, unprecedented investment into mental health care for New Zealanders as a whole across the country, as a result of much of the work that we learned from the Christchurch experience. That September quake, unfortunately, was the dress rehearsal. We didn't realise at the time. And in February of the following year, New Zealand experienced the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in the whole of the South Pacific. Buildings fell, people died, and our house got even worse than it was. And you know, the reality is that I had a period of about 5 hours where I didn't know if my husband was still alive. And it was, you know, we'd both been working in the CBD, of Christchurch. And so it was a really, really difficult time to navigate. At the time, we realised that the mental health stress on the city was going to be enormous. And so we were flooded, inundated with the most incredible support from the Mental Health Foundation New Zealand, the Red Cross New Zealand, and we were also involved in a kind of being a kind of live case study for a number of academic research institutes in the city. I was lucky enough to be working within the construction industry at the time, working with teams rebuilding the city. And it became part of my job to straddle the academic research teams and turn what they were learning about working in extreme stress under unprecedented conditions. What could we learn from the research and turn into practical things so that people could actually look after themselves better, look after their families better, and navigate through this very, very differently. So needless to say, Steve, my husband and I had some serious words about the slight wobbles of earthquakes in New Zealand.
I don't know what size this was, Kathryn. What on the Richter scale?
Oh my goodness, that's a really great question. I may have to confirm that. I'm going to make it up. I think it was about a 7.4 or something like that. But what made it a really, really tricky earthquake to navigate was the depth. It was a very, very shallow earthquake, and the center of it was on ground that was very, very rocky. And as a result, it sent shudders rather than waves.
Right.
I think it's called the peak fall. Again, I can send all of this through to you, but the peak fall was faster than gravity. So buildings were literally, you were leaving the floor as the building went up and down. So instead of doing the sideways wobble, buildings were going up and down. And because they were falling down faster than gravity, it was like being in I've never been in a spaceship for the benefit of the tape, but I imagine that's what being in a spaceship is like, because you're in free fall. So yeah, it was the first time I'd ever actually experienced real fear, and until that point I thought I'd been scared, but no, I hadn't.
No, not surprising. And you still not said about your house. What sort of conditions were you living in after that?
Yeah, interesting, I think, is a wonderful word to describe the conditions that we were living in. So what happened shortly after that, thankfully, was that our land became red zoned. And so what that means is that it was deemed too unstable to rebuild on. And we had entire districts of Christchurch that became red zoned. And this meant that, enormous populations of people were displaced and had to find new places to live. We decided that we were going to use this as an opportunity to do something we'd always wanted to do, which is move outside of Christchurch, but we hadn't really been able to find anywhere or to afford anything. And so, armed with a letter literally from the Queen of the UK to say she was buying back our land, and armed with a letter from the insurance company to say they would rebuild us a house, we literally started looking. The extra little twist to the story there was that I unexpectedly found out I was pregnant, having been told I couldn't have children. And so we started, it was like layer upon layer of everything that you wouldn't expect from life to happen. But we started looking and we found the most beautiful place, and we're now living in North Canterbury, which is about a 45-minute drive into Christchurch City. So we still both work in Christchurch City, but we commute. And we moved into our brand new, shiny new house in 2014, I think it was. So, but during the intervening period, we actually ended up building a shed on our land and literally living in a shed. and that was for about a year.
Wow.
And the reason for that is that we got lots of squatters living in the empty houses. You know, if you can imagine, whole areas of a city are displaced and
Yeah.
people move out, there are lots of empty houses. And so lots of squatters moved into the land, into the village. And so we decided it wasn't really feeling very safe anymore.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah, really interesting times.
was it the first or the second big earthquake when the cathedral collapsed?
That was the second one, so that was the
Second.
February one. So the September one was its size wise, the September one was the bigger event, but destruction wise, the February one was the bigger event, and that was a combination of buildings being displaced or damaged as a result of that September quakes, and then the fact that the epicenter was in a very different type of land. We became these really bizarre experts of, because you'd get aftershocks from both of the main epicenters.
Yeah.
And Christchurch residents became experts at working out whether it was an aftershock from the September quake or an aftershock from the February quake, depending on how the land moved. And there was almost this kind of bingo situation going on where you would experience an aftershock, and then you would straight away make a prediction that was at least a 4.6, that was an 8.2, that was a so, and then you'd immediately check it on the app to see what it was and how your guess compared. And I think so, what we really learned sort of from a resilience and wellbeing perspective in that environment, I think is intriguing, because it really applies to this place we find ourselves in as the world, as humankind right now. The difference with Christchurch is that we could lean out. So, people in Christchurch who had lost people, friends, family, relatives, loved ones, could lean out on those who hadn't. People who lost houses could lean out on people outside of Christchurch. Christchurch could lean out on New Zealand. But I think that one of the big challenges we're having right now in the world is, who do we lean on? How do we reach out and connect with other people who have strength, who can give us their strength, when the reality is so many of us are feeling pain and fear and uncertainty?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, you're washing over a lot of this, Kathryn, which I would have. I'm not a gambling man, but I pretty much would have bet on this, knowing what I do about you. So there you are, with a house that's falling down, finding you're pregnant for the first time when you didn't think you could have kids. And did you say you were actually doing work in the construction industry at the time?
Yeah. So well, actually, I know, it's like, well, to be honest, at the time of the September quake, I was actually working at St. John, of all places. So part of my experience with St. John was so they're the ambulance drivers over here. We literally rely on them, and so part of my role there was in helping really motivated and medical professionals to look after themselves, because they were reporting for double, triple shifts because they just couldn't switch off.
Yeah.
Because their drive to help and sustain life and support others in emergency situations is so strong. But again, the reality of what we were facing was, it sounds cliche about the whole kind of marathon versus a sprint, but the reality is we can't burn out now. We know from looking at patterns of human behavior that we are not going to recover from this quickly. This is something that we need to now look after ourselves and nurture ourselves and recharge, because if we think we can just grit our teeth and push through and stay strong for the next 6 months and then everything will be fine, I'll go back to normal, that's just not going to happen. The first thing that I learned about resilience in Christchurch is that when something big happens, you don't have a return to normal. You know, this fallacy about bouncing back is BS, to be honest. You know, we don't bounce back. We have to find a way to absorb what's happened to us and make it okay, and then look at making it more than okay, making it something to move forwards from, and move forwards more positively and in a much stronger way. And so that was, you know, one of the really intriguing places that I found myself having to consciously learn about, and then help other people to lean into as well.
So at what point did you have your baby then, Kathryn? Sorry, I'm just going to put. Oh,
Yeah, no,
I've just noticed I forgot my lights over the back of me, but never mind. I'm
do you know, so I have this phrase. So I have a wonderful lady who I work with over here in New Zealand, Dr. Lucy Hone. If you haven't seen her TED Talk on resilience, please do watch her TED Talk on resilience. So Lucy was one of my academic supervisors when I was writing my book about the Christchurch experience. And she's widely known around the world as being one of the top researchers in resilience. And she has this wonderful phrase which I've adapted. So her phrase is that you need to be real and not perfect. And my phrase that I've grown from that, with her permission, is that I'm professional rather than perfect. So, you know, don't worry about the lighting. I think I'm really grainy because
I'm so focused on you, Kathryn. I'm thrilled by your story. I hadn't really noticed I'm disappearing in the dark.
Oh, bless you. You.
So you still haven't answered the question. At what point did you have your baby?
Yeah, so my wee boy.
At what point did you decide I must write a book about all this?
Oh God! Well, so Cam, my wee Cam, came along in March 2012. So we had our first earthquakes in September 2010, and our February one in 2011, and then Cam came in 2012. We moved into the shed when he was 3 months old. So we had a new mum, a dad, a dog, and a cat, all living in a shed in the middle of nowhere. And when Cam was 7 months old, well, to be honest, I was asked to work in the rebuild, supporting the rebuild from the moment that it happened. But obviously, I had to take some time off to have a baby, but I actually started going back to work when Cam was 7 months old, because I could see that this was, you know, a really incredible opportunity, and I knew that I wanted to raise a really resilient child, and part of that for me is for him to know from a very early age that he is strong, he is capable, he is independent. You know, you and I were talking before we've started recorded, Steve, about independence in children. Yeah. You know, and it's so important. And self-belief, and adaptability. You know, these are the traits that make kids resilient. You know, well, I think I'm not an expert in child resilience by any stretch of the imagination. But so that was the kind of the timeline. The work that we were doing in Christchurch, I didn't realise was particularly special until I was talking to a friend, lovely Liz Hall, who is the editor at Coaching at Work magazine, which is a global coaching resource, I guess. And she said, look, we're having this conference in London in 2016. Would you come and talk about what Christchurch is doing to build wellbeing and resilience into people? And so I went along to that and spoke. And I didn't realise that somebody in the audience was from a publishing house, and they came to talk to me afterwards and asked if I would consider turning that into a book. I actually said no to start with, because the other twist to this is that I actually wrote and published a book with Penguin Random House in 2009 about redundancy and surviving redundancy, and how do we navigate the emotional impact of redundancy. But of course, because that launched in 2009, and then we had all of this earthquake stuff from 2010, I didn't really do anything with it. So I didn't really want to go down that publishing route again. But they were persistent, and I did. I'm delighted that, after it being a secret book for about 6 months, it then started getting noticed. I got a call from London that changed everything in January last year, that told me it had been named as a finalist for Best International Business Book.
Wow.
And then shortly after that, it was named as a finalist in the Australian Career Books of the Year. So the Australian Career Book of the Year, I'm not sure why, because this is New Zealand, but apparently it's kind of an Australasian career book. So that sort of got me thinking I'd better start talking about it, which in itself has required a lot of resilience personally, because I am not a natural conference speaker. I am not, I enjoy writing, I enjoy coaching, I enjoy one-to-one stuff. Put me on a stage in front of people, that's just not my happy place. But if it means that it helps businesses, organizations, individuals understand how to look after themselves better, then I'll do it.
But again, you beautifully glossed over the fact, it's a sort of a throwaway line. I got this phone call, will you come to London to speak at a conference about... Were you not sort of taken aback by that, Kathryn?
It's a really good point, Steve. I don't know whether I've ever really paused to think about it. I think for me,
did that to me, I'd be thinking,
yeah,
what's all the fuss about? Why would somebody want,
Yeah, I think that, so there has always been an element of surprise and an element of, I guess wondering where this is going. And there is a little bit of fear around that, because the vulnerability of talking in public, having to share your thoughts and being critiqued and, shot down on media and etc., that's the reality today of putting yourself out there. But my personal drive to share learning is stronger than that. And so what I always come back to, which I think is another part of understanding resilience, is connecting with the reason that I'm doing this and staying focused on my bigger vision. My vision is around making sure that we use the science. When we follow the science, building well-being and resilience should be fairly simple. Actually, I think we've really overcomplicated it in our heads, and we've turned it into this really big thing that that some of us are a little bit allergic to, and we turn off as soon as someone says resilience. We go, oh, yeah, got it, here you go, there we go again. But the reality is that we can't get away from it. We can't on one hand have a global stress epidemic like we had before pandemics came along, and also say we can't be bothered with understanding well-being and resilience. You cannot physically have those two opinions at the same time. Either we're serious about doing something about stress at work, in workplaces, or we're not. And if we are, then one of the things we have to acknowledge from the start is that it's not necessarily work's fault that it's stressful at work. There are awful employers that make awful decisions. I totally understand that. Thankfully, they are mostly few and far between, because most countries' legal systems prevent the kinds of situations that we saw in workhouses, for example. But the reality is that much of the stress that we experience in our life, we can make little daily choices that actually suppress that stress, that dampen it down, that recharge our battery, so that instead of walking through life or hurtling through life, as some of us choose to do, instead of hurtling through life with a semi-flat battery, and then we wonder why we fall on the floor, like something out of a Snoopy cartoon, when big stuff happens to us. Either we do that, or we constantly make daily choices to look after ourselves. We don't hop on social media within 15 seconds of waking up. We don't put self-care on the back burner until we've got time, or until we're about to have some sort of coronary, and then we take ourselves off on holiday for a week to try and recharge. We don't ignore feeling awful and waking up feeling awful every day. We go and do something about that. We talk to somebody who can help us. We don't hang out with people who don't want us to succeed. We choose to not spend time with them, however hard a decision that is. And we know that if we find ourselves stuck, we can reach out and learn from others who've been there before, and try things to get unstuck.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
So I mean, this is all absolutely fascinating, Kathryn. And then fast forward.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, into February, March this year, we suddenly have the coronavirus upon us, and you did something again very special during lockdown, I believe. So tell me about that.
Can't stop moving. So if I'm honest, there was a little bit of panic going on for me. There was a little bit of avoidance strategy, So I had my mum and dad, dear mum and dad, and family over in the UK, who were getting very, very different medical advice from New Zealand, and were making very different choices. And they're both high risk. They're older, and so as a wellbeing practitioner, even I found it really difficult in those first 3 to 4 weeks when we didn't really know much about coronavirus. And in New Zealand, everywhere you went, people were dressed in PPE suits. It was like something out of a bloody, science fiction novel. And so you're running on adrenaline, you're running on cortisol, your heightened anxiety is really, really up there. And so every time I left the house to go and do shopping, something as simple as shopping, it was like a military expedition to work out what I was going to wear, where was the sanitizer, face masks, stand in a queue to get into the supermarket, and you're not sure if you're going to get it. If you get it, what's it going to feel like? What's it going to be like? Are you going to die? We had all these conversations at home with an 8-year-old that we never expected to have. When your 8-year-old says, what happens if both you and daddy get it at the same time and you die? What do I do? You just kind of go, wow, that's a very unusual place to be in. So the reality is that I could see as a wellbeing professional, and also as a human who'd been through redundancy, who has had time to think. I thought, what, we're now looking at potentially a world of people who are sent home from work. And I know workplaces, so some of those circumstances will not be kind, and so we will potentially have a whole lot of people at home doing nothing for a period of time, who might find themselves thinking, right, well, I don't want to go back to work because they clearly don't like me, so I'm going to look for something new. Or, oh my God, how am I going to survive this? This is the worst thing that's ever happened. Or people in lockdown with other people who aren't kind to them. And so I had a conversation with some of my wellbeing professional friends from around the world, and five amazing people got together, and we designed in, I don't know if I'd ever do it again, but within the space of about 3 weeks, we designed and launched a wellbeing and resilience app. And now, I have mixed feelings about apps, to be honest, because, there's so many variables that you can't control around, the look and feel and professionality. But the reality is that we wanted something that was going to be useful, and that was going to draw from neuroscience of what our brain does under stress. So when we're stressed, we can't physically look for information. It becomes really hard for us to find information that we need, and we can get sucked into the doom and disaster of the news. And so we wanted your phone to become a place that actually has a moment of peace and kindness to yourself and information that's helpful. And so we designed a 30-week program. Each week has a different topic, and so it might be navigating grief, so understanding what happens to us when we're grieving, because we don't just grieve over the loss of somebody we love. We actually grieve, as I've shared, over job loss. We grieve over the kindness of the world, what's happening in the world. And so we wanted to have little snippets of information. What happens to us when we go through a grief process? A little activity every day for people to do. If you want to do something today, this is an idea of something that you can do. And it might be, watch this 3-minute video about grief, or about how to navigate emotions. So that is we had the technology platform. We designed all of the materials, and we probably had about a week of 18-hour days. But we designed that with in collaboration with a wonderful man, Brian Dolan, from over in the UK, who was voted one of the NHS's most influential people, I think, in 2017. Wow. So we wanted to have clinical grunt to that, and it's now being used actually wonderfully within a number of medical environments to support medical teams, to help them to navigate this as well. Because again, as I said at the beginning with St. John, medical professionals, the helpers of the world, medical professionals, HR professionals, we're the people that often find it really easy to step up and help, and we forget that we're humans in that process too. So we need to understand how to reach out.
So tell everybody what it's called, Kathryn.
It's called Kite Support, and so you can get it, I think. KITE support. Yeah. So Kite Support, it's I can send you all of the links, Steve, so that you've got links to Kite Support and my books if you like. But to any of your listeners, if you have any questions about what we've talked about today, or if you want me to elaborate on something because you don't understand, please do just get in touch, or connect with me through Steve or on LinkedIn. Those are the kind of places.
But again, see, Kathryn, you're doing a wonderful, almost passing it over like it's well, we just designed this app in 3 weeks. Was it 6 people in different parts of the world?
So it was 5 of us in total. So myself and 2 others in New Zealand. We're all part of a Wellbeing community here, and in fact, in June we're going to be there's another launch coming in July, end of July, and lovely Rhonda. So Rhonda D'Ambrosio is over in the UK, and she has also just launched a whole heap of wellbeing work for recruitment professionals, and so that's very, very specific to the recruitment world, because again, if we look at recruitment professionals right now under so much stress and pressure, to hold the emotional states of people who, in normal circumstances, they might just be able to support into a new job. But right now, there's so much more depth and help required for people who have lost jobs and who are navigating the job market right now. So she wanted to morph our work into that space. And Brian, who was meant to be in the UK and then was meant to be in Australia, and has actually come back to New Zealand. So as of today, I'm not quite sure where he is, but he travels around the world working with clinical and surgical teams.
So try and give us a flavour. I'm trying to picture this, Kathryn. You've come up with this idea, some great concepts. Clearly, you know each other very well, but you've only got...
We've never met. We've never met. No, never met.
Never met. You come together during lockdown, yeah?
Yeah.
During lockdown, and you form this amazing collaboration. And within the space of 3 weeks, you turn out this incredible app. I mean, how on earth did it happen? How did you make it all happen?
Oh my God, you asked the best question, Steve, because to be perfectly blunt, it just happened. We had, I had this vision of what we could do. Hannah, who is the so she owns the IP, I guess, around the platform itself for the apps, and so she had designed about a year and a half ago. She designed a very similar idea for new mums, because she experienced a very significant mental well-being episode after having a baby that was very unexpected. And because she's a psychologist herself, she got quite frustrated with having kind of monthly counselling sessions, but then not having anything to do in between that to help her look after herself. So she designed a program for new mums, and it's called Kite for Mums. And it basically, if you think about it like physio, when you've got a really sore arm and you go and see a physio and they do some exercises and they help it feel a bit better, and then they give you homework and so you can get stronger. Well, we kind of think about Kite as being homework for growing stronger. So for in between conversations with your manager, or conversations with your spouse, or a psychosocial support person, it's kind of what you can do in between.
I get all that, Kathryn, but you're not still.
Oh no! What am I missing? What am I missing? Which bit do you need?
How you don't know each other? You're all getting together. You got this great idea. How did you decide who does what? I mean, how did you...
that was very much a skill set. So if you imagine that you put yourself into a recruitment role and you've got a group of people that you're pulling together to deliver a project, and you think about, right, what does this project need? It needs somebody to be the writer. Well, who's got writing skills and experience in this space? That was easy. I put my hand up. Who has got marketing experience? Well, Rhonda she loves standing up and talking in front of people, and loves doing videos for YouTube and TikTok and, all this cool stuff that people use these days. So, that became her role. Sarah, whose business we decided to put Kite through because she already had an online sales platform. So it was her job to get her business ready to be able to handle the volume of Kite supports going through. And then Brian was the clinical lead, because his background is such that he's been a nurse, he's a consultant to the NHS. His specialism is clinical and medical support, and so I used him almost as my sounding board, so that I would write material and email them through to him. And then because he was a night owl and working with the UK, overnight he would read stuff, and if things weren't quite right, or if I'd accidentally got I don't know, my serotonin mixed up with my cortisol and my adrenaline and my dopamine, he would help me make sure that was all in the right place. Because again, the reality is that we wrote this under stress, we wrote this under pressure, but we wanted to make sure that we did something to feel as though we were helping. And I think that is, for me, that is one really big part of navigating extreme stress. When you are being kind to other people, it is physically impossible for your brain to release the same amounts of cortisol as under normal circumstances. So by giving to other people, by finding ways of being kind, you activate a chemical response in your brain which creates oxytocin, which creates a sense of calmness and trust. So it is physically impossible to feel stressed when you're being kind to other people. So that's one of my go-to strategies.
That's fascinating, Kathryn. See, when all this blew up, I woke up one morning with the infamous words of Charles Darwin in my head. That unbelievable quote, that it's not the strongest of the species that survives, it's the most responsive and adaptable to change. And
change.
I woke up with that ringing in my ears one morning, and I felt this overwhelming compulsion to turn my LinkedIn Winning Through group, which is the main purpose of this interview today, although it's going to go much wider than that, to reignite it into almost a Winning Through COVID group.
Yeah, lovely.
And I hadn't thought about it in the way you're describing, but I mean, to me, that was quite a big thing. But I mean, what you've done, it's a million times bigger than that.
No, so I think it's about scale. So two things that really spring to mind for me there is that, one of the core groups that we worked with over here in Christchurch drew from an organisation over in the UK actually that worked within the NHS called the New Economic Forum, and they identified what are known as 5 ways to wellbeing. And a really easy way of remembering those 5 ways to wellbeing is CLANG, like the acronym CLANG.
Right.
So it's connect, learn, be active, notice, and give. And so what we're talking about now is the give part of that. If you can give time, give kindness, give support, give help, if you can find a way to give to other people when times are stressful, or actually in your everyday life, you'll be refueling yourself, you'll be recharging that battery, and find that it's easier to navigate, because the brain chemical responses that you experience will be more around parasympathetic nervous system. Things will be calmer, and your brain will tell you more about how safe the world is, rather than how dangerous the world is.
That is absolutely fascinating. Well, I've learned lots today, but that's fascinating. Which also explains maybe why I've done some of the things I have over the last few months, that certain people think I'm absolutely crazy that I've been doing so much giving, and sometimes I've even questioned my own sanity. But that's
you're likely to be really just tuning into what your body needs to do right now, which is dampen down your flight, fight, freeze response. Yeah. Oh, well done. Oh, fantastic. Fantastic.
Well, I'm conscious of time, and this is going to be the longest ever video recording.
Sorry.
Well, no, don't apologise. I mean, I think I could talk all night over this stuff. But most importantly, I've got to ask you, Kathryn, what have you learned on this unbelievable journey? Starting with all the earthquakes, and then through that whole journey, and now with COVID and the app and everything else. What have you learned, and where does it all go now? What's next?
I can answer the first half of that question, which is, what have I learned? And, the big takeout for me is that follow the science. Don't follow what social media writers tell you to do, unless they are experienced and research based and grounded in evidence, because the reality is that the science about well-being, neuroscience, growth mindset, emotional intelligence, the science about brains is very new. It's 20 years young. And so but if we follow the science and use what the science tells us to use, then we will learn to navigate emotional well-being, physical well-being, spiritual well-being, intellectual well-being. We will navigate it all better. And when we navigate well-being, we become resilient. It's like the side effect of well-being. If we neglect our well-being, we cannot possibly expect to be resilient. And find your own word for resilience. If it needs to be adaptability, make it adaptability. But whatever word you want to call it, find a way to create it. And I like to encourage people to think about what I call the 3 E's of resilience, because it's nice and simple to remember. The first E is evidence. So what evidence am I noticing in my body, my mind, my behaviors that cause me to feel I'm either having a good day, so I'm feeling good and functioning well, Or I'm maybe having a bit of a wobble, that tight feeling you get, or your breathing changes, or you start getting a bit shitty with people
That's
that you
when it's
love,
got an
you know.
earthquake.
Yeah, well, all that, yeah. Those are the signs. That's the evidence that you're looking for, that things are not quite what they should be,
Yeah.
and you might need to activate the second E. Now, the second E is around empowering. Empower yourself with knowledge and information about the science of well-being. Go wherever you need to go, Google it, but only go to websites that are going to give you evidence-based research. Obviously, I'll say, look at my books, but at the end of the day, there are loads of really great books out there now, thankfully, about navigating this stuff. And then the third E is embed. Don't just think, right, I've nailed it, I've been really kind to somebody today, or I've phoned someone who makes me laugh, or I've been for a run, or whatever it is. Don't just go, right, that's it, I'm done, I'm well. Because the reality is that well-being ebbs and flows. You might feel great by 10 o'clock, and then by 2 o'clock you've had a phone call and you write down at the bottom again. So embed it into your daily life. Whenever you're drinking your cup of tea or coffee, check in with your body. How am I feeling right now? What's the chat? What's my inner chat like? Is it helping me or is it harming me? Is it like a best friend telling me you've got this? Or is it in a chat that's like, oh God, really? Here she goes again, So, what is that feeling like, so that you can embed and anchor well-being activities into your day every single day. And that is what leads us to well-being, which is what creates resilience. And that is how we adapt better in the face of unexpected or significant stress.
Brilliant. So what's next for Kathryn?
What's next? Who knows? Anyone out there got a crystal ball? My focus within New Zealand right now is on launching my Let's Talk program within organisations, and so that's aimed at really bringing wellbeing conversations to life in workplaces. So it's not just a wellbeing professional doing a workshop about mindfulness, and we've then learned about that and we go back to work and everything stays the same. It's about how do we start having conversations about the reality of wellbeing in workplaces. So that's my focus for the rest of this year. And then next year, I would like to start connecting back to my coaching work again, because I miss it. I miss my coaching.
Brilliant. Well, I have been absolutely captivated, Kathryn. I'm sure everyone who sees this interview is going to be absolutely blown away.
Thank you.
And I'm saying that totally genuinely, but I just love your total almost innocence about it all. It's like it's the most natural thing in the world that always happen. I mean, it's just some remarkable achievements. And
I think so even when you're saying that, I think the reaction internally is, for me, bad stuff happens to good people all the time. And sometimes it's little bad things and sometimes it's big bad things. But the reality is that everybody on this planet has a story, and the story that's got them to where they are includes some really great, amazing, incredible things and some really terrible, sad, awful things. And so for me, one of the big takeaways from anything to do with this wellbeing and resilience space is choose what you focus on, choose what you talk about, choose how you talk about it, and that is again going to contribute to your well-being and resilience, as long as you're not like pretending everything's okay when it's not. That's different. But if you are able to navigate difficult times through a different lens, that is again going to have an enormous impact on your resilience at work.
Brilliant. Well, life is all about choices, as you know, and in the infamous words of Forrest Gump, life is like a box of chocolates. But I'm so pleased that my choice was to interview you, Kathryn, because this has been just a complete eye-opener for me. So, yes,
well, you are so welcome.
Well, if you can send the links through and so on, and I'll put those underneath the video, which will probably be available on the Winning Through group in in a few days' time. But I can only wish you ever more success and to help to make a difference to the lives of ever more people. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, and please keep up the work that you do as well, Steve. You know, the work that career professionals around the world do around encouraging and supporting better choices, better headspace, better decisions, you know, it is absolutely, has been critical and will be even more critical going forwards. What if 2020 became the year that we all took a good hard look at ourselves and actually used these ideas to get stronger? You know, post-traumatic growth is a thing, so let's all own that and lean forwards into it together. And who knows, you know, you've got follow your dreams at the back. Who knows where some people might end up as a result.
Yeah.
Thank you for being patient and for inviting me to talk to you today.
I'm glad I waited, but what a great way to finish. Thank you again, Kath.
Awesome. Have a lovely evening.